Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the February's MD Pro member-only exclusive webinar. Today we're doing interview do's and don'ts. And so this is geared more towards those of you that are looking to interview or hire or bring somebody on. I've done a little research on some of the legalities, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you can and can't ask. I do want to point out before we get started that that is what Moti-Vitality does. We can help you hire and train and put together programs for sales professionals or management professionals or even office or service technicians. We've done a lot of that for both. So if you go through today and you go, man, that's too complicated, we'd love to help with that. But let's get started and jump right into it. First and foremost, I want to say thank you. I very much appreciate the opportunity to serve you in this way, whether you're listening live or listening to this later on recording or watching it. I really do appreciate it. It is my goal with all the presentations that I give to make sure that the information that I give to you is at least as valuable as the time you're giving to me. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. This was a book that I picked up way back when, and I've read a lot of them. There's Dave Ramsey's book, and I'm spacing on the name right now, where he talks about management, is also really, really good. He's got several that are good, but I love this book. It's a really easy read. Each chapter is a page, maybe 2 pages. He's not politically correct at all, but he's very very blunt, very direct, and it's just awesome for anybody that's doing any kind of managing. He talks in a very direct, very blunt style, a lot like Jeffrey Gitomer in the sales. In that way, I kind of like that style. So he says, you know, some of this stuff will make human resource managers cringe, but so you figure out how to do it legally. This is what has to be done, and I love that that approach. There's also the legal stuff that you follow and read too, but I recommend picking this up if you're looking for a really easy, light read. I'd recommend picking this up and reading it as a manager. It's really an excellent book. Okay, so first thing before, and we're focusing today mostly on the interview process, and this is what I've found for a lot of people that have been in our business. They've never really conducted a lot of interviews, so sometimes it's kind of just gut feeling. They go by gut feeling. They've not had any real training, and some, you know, gut feeling can help you out, but sometimes people, they don't always tell you the real truth in an interview. Oddly enough, how strange that is. Some people, I don't know, you know, I kind of went back into, after my divorce, I went and did the online dating thing. And more and more, I feel like interviews and job searches and people that are doing that, it's just like it. I mean, and when I was doing the online dating thing, it's like the first, maybe this is wrong, but it's almost like an interview. It's like you go online and you look on the profiles, and it's like a resume, and then you meet and you connect, and there's this interview basically, and it's amazing how often you find that the person that you started talking to, you know, they're way different than what they suggested they were online. And it's when you finally, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 dates to figure that out. And by the way, I should say that I'm happily engaged now, so, and have been for nearly 2 years involved with somebody. So it does work. You do find the right person, but it sometimes takes a long time. So if you look at hiring somebody in your company, as important as finding a life partner, then you should take a little more time into it. You should really look at their resume, look at their application, study that, and then spend several dates with them before you decide to move in together or have them come over to, you know, have them join your team. particularly with positions like sales where they are in the home representing you. I mean, we're bringing people in that are not there to be babysat. You know, we're bringing people in that are going out into people's homes, into their private areas, and representing our company. And often we're not with them, monitoring them or supervising them when that happens. So after a very short period of time, we're putting our company's reputation in the hands of people that are virtual strangers. And so I think it's really important to make sure that you do it right when you do that interview process. Make sure that you do it right. And some of that has to do with preparation. Some of it has to do with understanding what you're going to hire and who you're going to hire and what the position is first. And we're going to talk about that very briefly here. But it's important to know what you're going to bring that person in for and what your expectations are. So first, figure out what type of job you're hiring for, whether it's sales or administration, service installation manager, or if they're going to have combined responsibilities. Know what you want them to do first. Kind of pinpoint it, and don't bring somebody in just having them kind of do a jack of all trades type thing. So have an idea of what they're going to do before you talk to them. It's interesting. I talked to an awful lot of owners or managers that have not had a lot of success with people coming in because of that, because they've just they've kind of brought the same person on, or the person they met one time, and they gave them a ton of responsibility because that person came in and said all the right things and did all the right things. And I just think it makes a lot more sense to spend that time up front with somebody, researching them and figuring it out before you bring them into your organization and give them so much responsibility and trust. We at Moti-Vitality, we spend, before we recommend a candidate to a client, if we're hiring for somebody, we spend 8 to 10 hours and a 4-step interview process with them. And we're going to go through that briefly here in just a moment. But preparation is important. So, for example, you need to start with an understanding of what you want. If you're hiring a sales professional, somebody that's going to do sales, hire with if you want somebody that's going to go out and create their own business. Now, maybe you're looking for somebody that can close house leads, and that's your highest priority. So it doesn't have to be somebody who's going to create all of their own business, but let's say that you want to bring somebody in, then you have to look for that person from the very beginning. Look for that person right from the get-go. Okay, so one of the things you're going to see in that Steve Robbins book, they must be professional. If they're going to represent your company when they come in there, take a look at them. I love doing interviews with Jim, because particularly for sales, because somebody comes in and even if they're wearing a suit, sometimes the way you present yourself is not necessarily professional. And Jim, and it's like a sales call. So if they come in there and they're talking to Jen and I, it's almost like talking to a couple around the kitchen table. And I love seeing Jen's first impression. Was that person professional? Would I want them in my house? Could I see them sitting across the table from me? And so you've got to look at that. And professionalism is in the way they present themselves. Are they dressed appropriately? Are they polite and kind? How do they treat your staff when they come in? Do they treat the receptionist like, with respect? So that's all part of that professionalism. Professionalism is being on time. Do they show up on time? Are they prepared? Those are professional attributes to look at right away. During the interview process, now obviously you can't come right out, and we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts and what you can and can't say here in a little bit. So you're not allowed to come out and say, so are you intelligent? I mean, you can't ask that, but you can figure out whether or not they are intelligent if you spend any time with them. Some people are really good at pretending to be intelligent, but then when you really sit down and you talk to them, they're not. So put together some questions, and not the stock generic questions that get asked so often. I mean, there's a list of those generic questions that a quick Google search can pull up. The thing is, some people are intelligent enough to read those questions, or they've been on enough interviews that they already know how to answer those questions. So I like to ask kind of out of the box questions that are legal, but that challenge somebody to really demonstrate the things they're saying, so that you get a little more substance in their answers. And the substance of their answers will tell you whether or not they're going to be innovative or intelligent and able to solve problems, what their critical thinking skills are. You can really design some unique questions that will show you who they really are. Tell them from the very beginning, from the first telephone interview, even in the ad, if you look at the sample of ad that Jen and I will typically run, our ad is very specific. It says that there are going to be evenings and weekends. It says that it's not an easy job. We're hiring for a sales position, for example. We tell them that it's going to be a really hard job, that they're going to have to create some of their own business, that they are, so that even the job ad itself begins to be part of the interview process. We're very specific on it, on the ad, on what the responsibilities are. Because I'd rather have, some people, they go, well, you don't get as many candidates that way. I'm like, yeah, you don't get as many candidates that way. If you're going to interview properly, if you're going to go through the process properly, it takes a lot of time to interview somebody, to bring them on and find that out. So I'd rather start with 10 qualified candidates than 50 and have to narrow it down to those 10. So I like to narrow the field. I'd rather have only 10 resumes of people who understood from the beginning what the position is than 50 of people that I gotta go through and explain it to and have them say, oh, it's not exactly what I was looking for, or more often than not, just not even call you back or show up for an interview. My time's valuable, so I want to narrow that down. So the ad itself is the beginning of the interview process. So, but tell them what the expectation is all the way through, Jen's pointing out here, I don't know if you guys have the chat window open, but Jen's pointing out here that she says that she makes sure to send them a copy of the ad prior to talking with them over the phone, to make sure they're fully interested and to make sure they understand prior to talking to them. And that's really true because, a lot of times we almost always will run an ad on one of the online services, Monster or Career Builder. We just hired a gentleman for a company, a client of ours yesterday, that came from ZipRecruiter, and so this was our first time using ZipRecruiter. We had a lot of success, more than any of the others with ZipRecruiter. I think some of that might be regional, but if you're looking to run an ad or find somebody, I'd recommend taking a look at ZipRecruiter, at least for now. If you're listening to this, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I would have said Career Builder, and 7, 8 years ago, I would have said Monster. And so I think they cycle through, so that's not an endorsement of one particular company or another, but I will tell you most recently that's the one we had the most success with was ZipRecruiter, which is a fairly new service, I think. But Jen's right. Make sure that, a lot of times when somebody's looking for an opportunity, looking for a job, they're going through and they're just clicking and applying to lots of different jobs. And so make sure they understand when you talk to them that they understand the position that you are representing and the company that you're representing. And then have some preparation there. Know what you're going to pay them, know how their pay structure works, know what you're going to do ahead of time. If you want professionals, you have to pay professionally. That's so important. If you want somebody, if you bring somebody in who thinks that $25,000 or $30,000 a year is a great income for a salesperson out there, then don't be surprised when that person goes out in the home and acts like somebody who makes minimum wage. I'm not saying that everybody who makes minimum wage would do that. I am saying that if you want a sales professional, what's a professional income? And so make a path, even if it's commission-based, make a path for them to make that kind of money. Have that in mind. Or and if you want professionals, you're going to have to pay them professionally. You've got to put together a professional. You expect them to be professional in your organization, then you need to be professional in your organization. Otherwise, they're going to emulate what you do. We do have if you're looking at expanding your organization, we do have some sample pay structures and commission structures that you can take a look at and put your own numbers in and kind of go off of it. There's a lot of different ways out there, but if you're looking, sometimes the whole idea of that can get overwhelming. And we can, as members, and all of you listening to this webinar are members of Moti-Vitality, so you have access to that, but we can help you put that together too. So that is one of the tools that you get as a member. So again, if you want professionals, you have to hire professionals. That means paying for professionals. When you're preparing for this job, make sure that you know what the job description is, and then know what your measure of success is. What do you have? What expectation do you have of this person? Even if it's somebody in the office, how many hours? How do they answer the phone? What do you want them to say when they answer the phone? Don't just wing it. You know, if you just wing it, then expect just winging it results. I mean, sometimes you might get lucky and have success, but plan it out as much as you can. Keep in mind that regardless of what position you're hiring for, regardless of what position you're bringing them in for, it's sales. It's all about sales. Just like I said, when that person, if we're hiring, now Jen and I mostly hire for managers or sales positions, but we have hired service technicians, and we've hired service managers, and we've hired admin personnel for companies, for our clients. So it doesn't matter what the position is. It's all about sales. So when they come in, ask yourself, are they selling me? Am I willing to buy from this person? Which is exactly what you're doing if you're looking at bringing them on. They're looking to sell their service, their ability to perform a function for your organization, and you have to decide whether or not you're going to pay them for that service. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. Just like when you walk into a house, your customers make a decision whether they're going to pay you for your service. Okay, you go in there and you say, this is what I can do for you, this is how I can help. You are answering an ad basically to help them with their water. And if they don't hire you, well, then you move on to the next opportunity. Well, that's what's happening. It's the same thing. Everything's sales. Job interview is that same way. So when they come in there, make sure that you look at that and say, would I buy from this person? Do I want to pay them for their services? You know, are they selling me? Do I trust them to serve my company? So take a look at it that way, and also be honest with them. You know, in the interview, don't be afraid to tell them the pros and cons of the position, the good and the bad. They're going to find out. If they come to work with you, they're going to know the good and the bad within a little while, just like you're going to know the good and the bad about them. So don't be afraid to have those conversations. I talk to a lot of people that have, you know, maybe they had a really long career in something and they got laid off or whatever they had. They found themselves sometimes in their mid-40s or 50s looking for a new position, or even older sometimes, and they're looking for a new position. And I see that they've had a couple where, you know, they worked in the same company for 20 years, but then they left and they took another job somewhere else, and they were only there maybe a year. So what happened? Why were you only there a year? So it was not what they said it was going to be. It was the position was not what they said it was going to be. And I've heard that enough times that I know that it's not the people that are just telling me that it's not just the guys coming in. I think that there are companies that go out there and try and sell their positions to people, try and convince them to come work for them. And I disagree with that. I don't think that's the way to do it. I think that you have to be honest and straightforward with them do tell them about the positive things. Obviously, you want them to know the good things about the company and about the product and the service and the position, but also tell them what they're going to run into, you know, so that they can make a decision. Keep in mind, when somebody comes in and they're looking for a job, this is a life-changing thing. I mean, you know, working for a company, you're there a third of your life, basically. I mean, and I've never met anybody in the water treatment industry that was successful where it didn't become part of their life, their families, I mean, we were talking yesterday to the candidate that we brought on for our client. It's like the matrix and the red pill versus blue pill, right? And when you come into this industry, it's like you took the red pill. If you never saw the matrix, you maybe don't understand what I'm talking about, but it's like it opens, when you come into this industry, your eyes are opened and you can't undo it. You cannot undo the knowledge. It's like this whole new world of water when you come into it, and even it becomes who you are. You live it and eat it and breathe it. So keep in mind that when you're interviewing this person, you're about to bring them into this life change, into this really important life change for you too, because they're going to be part of your life as well. Okay, so we have a minimum 4-step interview process. The first thing we do is a telephone interview. So we run the ad, we sort the resumes, we go through. Now, generally the way we will do this, and it really depends. I think if it's like an admin position, you can have them come in if the position's a little more defined. But for a sales or management position especially, I really think it's important to go through the process to make sure. I started doing telephone interviews and making that an official interview when I was sales manager, because what would happen was I'd set up an interview and I'd have people come into the office and I'd schedule all day long for people to come in, and sometimes they wouldn't show up, or sometimes they would they'd get in there in 10 or 15 minutes, realize that it was different than what they thought it was, and so I'd have an hour and a half or 2 hours slotted for this interview, and then I find that my next interview is not coming in for 2 hours. So I started doing the telephone interviews out of respect for them and my time. So basically, the way we do it now when we're hiring a sales professional is we'll sort the resumes, and if we find one we like, we will reach out to them and say, we're going to be conducting preliminary telephone interviews Wednesday morning between 10 and 12. Will you be available? And if they say yes, that will work, and then we send a copy of the ad to them and a confirmation of that interview. The reason I started doing that also is, when you first call people and you want to talk to them a little bit and to schedule you kind of want to get a little information, a lot of times these days you're calling them on their cell phone or the number that they're available. And I know that if I get an important call right when I'm taking my daughter to dance or doing something with my fiance, or I'm caught off guard. Plus, if I have submitted a resume to 5 different companies, it takes me a minute to remember which one is which, what the position was. Maybe I'm looking for several different things. So I think it's a little unfair to catch somebody off guard like that. So I like to I like to let them prepare a little bit. Plus, it lets me know during that first interview how much they're interested, because Jen and I will send them a copy of the ad again so that they understand which job they're interviewing for. And it's really interesting, sometimes they will begin to do a little more research on the company. And the questions that they ask Jen and I during those interviews, during those telephone interviews, are very telling. It's very interesting to see if they took advantage of that heads up to prepare as well. So I think it's a great way to start off. I think you get a much better view of somebody when you don't catch them off guard on the telephone. And I think it's very respectful to them, and the people that we bring in appreciate that respect. In fact, I often hear our candidates, even if we don't offer them the position, they are very appreciative that we do that. Nobody else does that. So already it sets you apart from your competition. I mean, you're competing against all those other people out there that are offering jobs too. You do want the best candidates. You want to attract them to your business. During that telephone interview, don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. Make sure that they know that it's straight commission, for example, if it is, or make sure that it's, ask them hard questions. Why have you been, what was your last position? Have you been looking for work. You know, I ask them hard questions during that first telephone interview. And I'm very realistic about the job requirements and the expectations, because I would rather them tell me on the phone, you know, I don't think this is going to work out. I mean, one of my favorite emails to get from somebody is, you know, after talking to you on the phone, I realize this is not the position that I'm looking for. I wish you the best of luck. I love getting that email, because it means that I can then schedule somebody else in that slot. It's, you know, rather than waiting for them to show up at the interview and twiddling your thumbs, just figuring it out. I mean, which is incredible that people do that in the first place. They just don't show up. But if you start off showing them respect, they're way more likely to show you respect through the process. Don't be afraid to tell them if they don't meet the job requirements. I mean, if you hear something in the telephone interview, same thing. Don't be afraid to let them know if they don't meet it. Preliminary interviews, I always say that the preliminary face-to-face interviews are scheduled next week, and, you know, either they're invited or they're not. I mean, we sometimes, if we like somebody, we'll go in and schedule it right there on the phone, but I want them to understand that this is the first of many steps in the interview. It is a competition. And then I always make sure to ask them to call or email or let us know if they can't make it. It seems unnecessary to do that, but it's interesting. It does help if you ask them that, just to let them know. So please call. Okay, so then the first face-to-face interview. This is really.
Can I begin real quick? One of the things that I do is I make sure, too, when I first get on the telephone with them, this is after I've called them, set up a phone conversation. I don't really call it an interview. I just say a phone conversation to get to know each other and talk about the position. But then I tell them at the very beginning the whole process. You know, I explain to them, well, first off, because we're Moti-Vitality and we hire and train, I explain to them our role, but then I also explain this is our interview process and talk about the different phases of the interview. And I tell them this first conversation is just to get to know you and get all the tough stuff out of the way. So please don't feel uncomfortable at any time if you don't think that this is the right position for you. I completely respect if it's not the right position. I'd rather know now than later on, you know, when you're doing the face-to-face interviews, or if you just don't show up for an interview. So I do let them know right away that if at any time this isn't the right position, my feelings are not hurt.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, to let them know that the interview, I think, to acknowledge the fact that it's a two-way interview, that they're looking to make a life change as well. And I think if you enter into it with that kind of respect from the very beginning, it makes the interview process a lot more open and honest. So that's a really good point, Jim. Thank you. Okay, so the first face-to-face interview, this is where you're going to get your first, the opportunity to see them the first time. Are they on time? Are they too early? That's a big deal too. You know, do they come in there and ask to have that interview an hour early? I've had that happen. Are they dressed professionally? Does it look like they want the position? You can learn so much about them by observing a little bit. And this is really important. What questions do they ask? Do they go straight to the pay? Or do they ask you questions about the longer hours and the weekends? Well, how many nights a week is it? How many evenings a week is it? You know, you can learn a lot about that. But reiterate your expectations, again, through this first face-to-face interview. Here's the thing, whether they are in the office answering phones for you or whether they're going to be in the home, if you wouldn't buy from this person, your customers won't either. Okay, there's only one chance to make a first impression. Don't hesitate to talk to your receptionist and ask what they thought after he or she is gone from the office. What do you think of that person? Did you get any vibes from them? I mean, there's been so many times. I always talk to our receptionist in the office, and my assistant, when I was manager there, because there was one guy that I really liked in the office. I liked him, and when he was there for an hour and a half on one of the hottest days of the year, and he brought his kid with him, and his kid was in the car for an hour and a half, and the guy never once said anything about it. My receptionist said, I mean, she was fuming. She was just fuming over it when he left. I mean, she was so angry over that. So make sure you talk to them, because they're going to see things and observe things that you're not going to see either. And just remember that if you wouldn't buy from them, neither will your customers. That's really important. Don't ask those stock questions. I mean, we're not going to spend a ton of time on how to word things specifically today. This is kind of the do's and don'ts very specifically. I want to get into some of the legal stuff, which is a little surprising when you really sit down and look at what you can and can't say. You know, just to kind of be careful. It's a little complicated. I want to go over that stuff because a lot of people have never really heard that stuff before. But one of the things I can say about the questions that you ask is don't ask only the stock questions. You know, what do you like to do for fun? Or, you know, what do you think the best attribute of a salesperson is? Or, you know, how would here sell this pin to me? You know, those are stock questions that people that have been on interviews before, they know how to answer them. They have their canned answer, and it can sound really good. And so look for questions that might catch them off guard a little bit. One of my favorite ones that we do is I asked them, I knew these twins once, and I'll ask them, do you like riddles? And they will a lot of times go, well, sometimes, or that's weird. And I'll make this statement to them. I'll say, I'm going to make a statement that I absolutely believe to be true, and I'd like you to explain the statement to me. I will repeat it as often as you need me to, and but you can ask me as many questions as you want about it, but the questions have to be formed in a way that I can answer them with a yes or a no. And the riddle that I will give them, or the statement that I will give them, I would say, I absolutely believe this to be true. I'll say, I knew these twins once. One was 20 and the other was 22. And then, now, the reason I like this statement is because it has nothing to do with water. I mean, suddenly we were talking about water and the company and professionalism and all this stuff, and now I'm talking about I knew these twins once. One was 20, the other was 22. And it's so interesting how you can have a guy who just told you that the best quality a salesperson has was his ability to diagnose a problem and you know, say, what do you think the best skill a salesperson needs to have is, or a sales professional needs to have? And they'll go, somebody that can ask questions and diagnose a problem and really listen to a customer and find out what their needs are. And so I'll say, okay, I'm going to make a statement that I absolutely believe is true. And I'll say, I knew these twins once. One was 20 and the other was 22. And that person who just said that the best attribute was to listen and be able to diagnose, and they go, that can't happen. It's impossible. That won't happen. Or you find out, do they start asking questions? I knew these twins once. One was 20, the other was 22. They'll ask, were they related? Were they brother and sister? Were they identical? People ask me, were they born on leap year? Which doesn't make any sense, but okay. I mean, you can hear by their questions whether they're trying to figure out the answer. You can see how well they're working under pressure, because this is a question they've never gotten before in an interview. And by the way, if you're wondering what the answer is, we will put this up on when we upload this webinar to the members only exclusive webinar page. We will have this written out for you and the answer on that page. So we'll try and do that a little later on today or tomorrow at the latest to have that answer up. So I knew these twins once. One was 20, the other was 22. And so we'll have that. But I love this type of question. It doesn't have to be this one. This type of question can tell you a lot about a candidate and how they react and the way they do it. So, okay. Second face-to-face interview. Now, in the first face-to-face interview, I don't spend a lot of time talking specifically about the position. We narrow it down. I'm trying to get an idea of personality. I do ask them at the end of that first face-to-face interview sometimes, or sometimes we'll do it at the second face-to-face interview. We let them know that we have a lot of candidates and that we're narrowing it down and that this is not a shoe-in. But we do let them know, look, you've made it to the next step. We're going to bring you back in for another interview. That's a good step. We've got 3 candidates that we're looking at here in the second face-to-face interview. Would you like to be here first, second, or third? You know, as we're scheduling those, would you like to come in first? Would you like to come in second, or would you like to come in third? You know, in the position, in the order that we interview. That's always an interesting question. I like to hear, you know, especially in a sales position, I like to hear whether somebody, I mean, basically what I'm asking them is, you know, you're competing against 2 other companies. You want to be first in, middle in, or last in. And a lot of people answer, oh, I want to be last. I want to give the last impression. The ones that I really like, that I'm most impressed with, are the ones who say, I want to be there first. I want to set the bar for everybody else. I want to be the guy that you compare the others to. I want to be that guy, and I like that. I like that answer a lot. But so that's what I mean by you can ask questions that will tell you a lot about the way they're going to approach their position as well, right in those interviews. But one of the things that I always do during the first interview, Jen and I will make a note. Because a lot of times in that first face-to-face interview, we're joking and laughing and we're getting comfortable with them. But I like to look for something that I can kind of change my personality on and hit them hard with on the second interview. Because I want to see how teachable they are. And I want to see how well they react. So, for example, if somebody comes in, if they say, sometimes they'll cuss in the first face-to-face interview because we spend an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they're relaxed and we're joking and it's fun, and they'll say, you know, some kind of a cuss word, or maybe they'll talk about politics or something in the interview. They'll bring it up and start talking about, I mean, right now that's a big one because it's during the election. They'll start talking about that. And so during that second face-to-face interview, I'll jump in there and I'll say, you know, I know we were relaxed and enjoying ourselves, but during that first face-to-face interview, you said this cuss word, and I was wondering what indication I gave you that it was okay in a professional interview for you to use language, and I'm a little concerned that you would use that language in front of a customer in the house, and I love kind of switching that personality to let them know that I'm not all about, you know, this is a professional position, to kind of bring it back. But I love seeing them answer that question. Now, if they're in there on the second face-to-face interview, odds are we are interested in this then as a candidate. So that wasn't a deal breaker. But what I'm really looking at is to see if they get defensive, or if they make excuses, or if they're humble, if they come back in and say, you know, I was thinking about that afterwards, and I was so hoping you wouldn't notice that because I screwed up. I would never do that. I just felt really relaxed and comfortable, and I, you know, and you can get an idea. That's what I want. I want to see that humility, you know, and whether or not they're going to be at least aware of it. Ask hard questions and give hard scenarios. This is the point that we show them a path to make the money that they're going to make. We give them the pay structure. We talk a lot more about it. We'll also allow them we'll give them a tour of the facility a little bit more. And I give them a chance to ask me questions. This is where we let them ask us all the questions that they have, and we can learn a lot about them answering those questions as well. And we'll even let them talk to other people in the company, other managers, other people that they're working with, just to get a feel. Okay, I believe very strongly in the last face-to-face interview. I believe we usually do this over a dinner or lunch if they're married, and you can usually find that out in the 8 hours that you spent with them before, and the 6 to 8 hours that you've already spent with them and looking at them. You can't ask, are you married? That's not something you can do legally, but you'll usually have an idea. But I'm a firm believer in talking, going to dinner or lunch if they're married with a spouse, particularly in a sales position or a straight commission position, because I want to see how they interact with their spouse. I want to see how respectful they are with wait staff, with other people in the company. I want to see how they're acting when they're relaxed. But again, going back to it, you cannot work this job. Yeah, significant other. Thank you, Jen. That's absolutely true. Spouse or significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, or somebody who's going to be part of their life, and that's really true. It's not necessarily a spouse. So you need to make sure that everybody. I mean, I started doing this because I brought people on, and male and female, where they think they can do it. It's been there, but you get 3 months into it, and they're getting pressure from home because the commission, straight commission, and they've had a bad month, and they're getting a little pressure from home, or maybe you have that, you go to dinner and everything, and the guy said, yeah, no problem, I can do that, no problem, and then you go to dinner and the wife says, well, how many nights a week do you think there'll be? Because right now he takes our daughter to dance 3 times a week, or and we do this on Saturdays always, and so maybe he downplayed what the requirements were in the evenings and weekends, and that's a really telling question. I think it's a question that has to be answered very honestly, because I'd rather know that, even if I've gone through the interview process, we've spent that much time, I'd rather know that before we bring them on, rather than investing all the time and energy in training them and only to have them 3 months later leave. I think understanding the expectations. When Jen came on, when I was sales manager at the company I used to be sales manager, Jen was one of our sales professionals, and her husband came in, and we had that conversation, so that he understood that. I mean, you have to talk about scenarios. You can't ask the questions. So you can't come out and say, are you comfortable with this scenario? But you can, in conversation, talk about scenarios you might be in, male and female. So, it is relevant to have that conversation, to say, I was in a house one time in the evening time, no cell phone signal, and my wife, I couldn't call her to tell her I was going to be an hour later than I expected because there was no cell phone signal, and I spent half the time in the basement with this guy talking. And you can draw this scenario and make sure that they understand that, I think it was important to talk about those job requirements and the situations that Jen was going to be in, so that they could have an honest discussion later about whether or not it was something that she felt comfortable with, male and female, by the way. I mean, those are situations that are, for me, it had somebody in the interview told me, there are going to be occasions you're going to have to tell your kids you can't tuck them in at night, even when they're crying and asking you to, because you have to go out and run a sales appointment. That's an important part of the position. So, and it's something that you gotta, that I would rather know ahead of time whether that's going to be a problem. I do believe very strongly in background checks and driver's licenses and drug screens. And in terms of references, I'm not a big believer in references, just because most of the time people are going to write down references of people that are going to give really good information about them. They're not going to give you the names of people that are going to say bad things about them. So I don't put a lot of stock in references like that, especially with social networking nowadays. You can look at LinkedIn and see if they have reference letters on their LinkedIn accounts. You can, and Jen's pretty good at this. It's something we started doing. We call it social network stalking. Basically, where when we are interviewing a candidate, we do get on and look at we try and find what we can find on Facebook. And, if they're rude and derogatory and posting stuff on a personal Facebook page all over, that's telling. We look at their LinkedIn account. We look at their Facebook account if they have it. And that stuff's public. They're going to be representing your company. So be aware of that. Jen's making the point here that if you're checking references, you got to make sure you read up on the questions you can and can't ask. And that's where we're going next with this. We're going to spend the rest of this webinar going through talking about some of the legal stuff on this. These rules are going to vary from state to state and even within different companies. But these come pretty much directly from Labor Department and from what is legal and not legal. So there, like I said, from state to state or region to region or company to company, there may be some different policies in place. But in general, what we're going to talk about for the remainder of this webinar are some of those do's and don'ts. And you can kind of figure out how to go about saying things and doing things, you know, how you can word them. Sometimes you have to be a little creative to get the information. Okay, so who is interviewing? This is something that I learned as I was doing my research. I thought this was kind of interesting, but legally, when somebody comes in, anybody who has contact with that candidate, even a receptionist who hands them the application, other salespeople that might see them talking to them, they are all considered part of the interview process. So they have to be aware of what the rules are as well. So they're sitting out there waiting, and the receptionist is not allowed to ask a candidate while they're waiting to be interviewed whether they're married or whether they have kids or if they've been watching the election and who they're going to vote for. I mean, they're not allowed to do that. So everybody, all settings, including informal gatherings with department members who are not members of the search committee, are considered to be part of the interview of the candidate. Everyone who will have contact with candidates should be made aware of the areas of inquiry that are not appropriate or illegal questions that should not be asked in order to avoid future complaints. That was kind of interesting. It's something I recently learned. Okay, so I'm going to go through alphabetically on the do's and don'ts, the cans and can'ts that you can ask and can't ask here. All right, so any questions regarding the address or their residence, you can ask the place and length of their current and previous address. You can ask how long they've lived in a city. You can ask that. You can ask for their phone number or how they can be reached. You cannot ask, you cannot make any specific inquiries into foreign addresses that would indicate a national origin or the names or relationships of people with whom they live. And you're not allowed to ask whether they rent or own a home. Their age, you can ask, as far as before hiring only, you can ask for proof of age if they're a minor in the form of a work permit or a certificate of age. If age is a legal requirement, you can ask, if hired, can you furnish proof of age or a statement that the hire is subject to the verification of the age. And you can ask whether or not the applicant is younger than the employer's regular retirement age. After hiring, you can require proof of age by a birth certificate. You cannot ask about the age or age group or date of birth of the applicant. Now, it's kind of interesting. Sometimes you can get an indication of that by looking at when they went to school or college or whatever, but you're not allowed to ask that stuff. That's important. You cannot ask for a birth certificate or a baptismal record before hiring. And you cannot ask questions that would tend to identify people between 40 and 60 years of age. You can ask, after employment, can you submit a birth certificate? This is as far as birthplace or national origin. After employment, can you submit a birth certificate or other proof of U.S. citizenship or other proof of the right to remain in or work in the U.S.? You can ask about their foreign language skills if it's relevant to the job. You have to be sensitive to cultural references, and that's kind of important too, because when we, even growing up culturally, you got to be careful about, using cultural references. I mean, a lot of times I've heard people say the things that they grew up saying, derogatory terms that they grew up saying that identify cultural references. People And I'm going to say this as an example to give an example, and I hope that this is in no way offensive to anybody. But as an example, I've heard people say, "Yeah, I had one sales guy who came in and tried to do me down to this amount." Well, that's a derogatory statement for culturally. It's a derogatory statement and one that would absolutely be illegal and wrong to say. I mean, and so references like that are you have to be aware of those types of cultural references. You can't assume the mispronunciation of English as a lack of education, and don't interpret silence as an inability or unwillingness. Different people have different personalities. You cannot ask if an applicant is native born or naturalized. You can't ask where they were born. You can't ask questions that identify customs or denomination, the birthplace of his parents or grandparents or other members of his family. You cannot require an applicant to submit a birth certificate or naturalization or baptismal record before employment. You cannot ask anything about national origin, like the parents, maiden name, wife, mother, anything like that. And you can't ask about their first language or their date of arrival in the U.S. or the port of entry. You can ask whether they're a U.S. citizen. You can ask if somebody intends to become one. You can ask if they have a legal right to work in the U.S. You can ask if they're prevented lawfully becoming employed. You can ask if the spouse is a citizen. You can ask that if they can submit proof of citizenship. After hiring, you're allowed to require proof of citizenship. In fact, you're required to do that. With citizenship, it's illegal to ask where they're a citizen, what country. If they're native born or naturalized, proof of citizenship before hiring. Okay, so we went with that. Credit rating, just say no. You're not allowed to ask for a credit rating or to talk about that at all during the job interview. Criminal records, this has been changing with different states, different policies, but you can ask about actual convictions or other than misdemeanors that relate to reasonable fitness to perform a particular job. So you can ask about that, particularly if people are going into the home and representing you, or if they've had DUIs and driving a company vehicle, or driving violations. That stuff, you can talk about that because it is part of the job requirement. You can ask about convictions or imprisonment if crimes relate to the job duties and the conviction or release from imprisonment occurred within the last 10 years. It's illegal to ask about arrests that did not result in a conviction, or to check into a person's arrest court or conviction record if not substantially related to functions and responsibilities of a particular job in question. You can't ask about any involvement in demonstrations. In terms of disabilities, you have to accommodate for the interview if somebody's disabled. You've got to be careful how applicants with disabilities are evaluated, and don't make judgments based on communication skills of people with hearing or speech impairments. Inquire for the purpose of determining an applicant's capability to perform the job. So the burden of proof for non-discrimination lies with the employer. You can ask whether or not the applicant is able to carry out all the necessary job assignments, functions, and to perform them in a safe manner. And you can ask, how would you do this? How would you perform this particular task? You can invite an applicant to indicate how and to what extent they're disabled. And the employer has to indicate that they are in compliance with the invitation and that it's voluntary, and the information is being sought only to remedy discrimination or provide opportunities for the disabled. And the information has to be kept confidential. And if they refuse to give that information, it won't result in adverse consequences. So legally, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 says that you can't ask job applicants general questions about whether they're disabled or asking them about the nature and severity of their disabilities. You can't ask about the kind of accommodations he or she may need until after the interviewer has established the applicant is qualified for the job and is considering that person for employment. So once you've decided, yeah, they could do the job, then you can have those discussions. An employer must be prepared to prove that any physical or mental requirements for the job are due to business necessity and the safe performance of the job. Except in cases where undue hardship can be proven, the employer must make reasonable accommodations for the physical and mental limitations of an employee or applicant. That includes alteration of duties, alteration of physical setting, and provision of aids. As far as education, what academic and professional or vocational schools are attended, you can ask that. You can ask what language skills, such as reading, writing, and foreign languages they have, what office skills they have. You cannot ask the nationality, racial, or religious affiliation of the schools attended, or how the foreign language ability was acquired. In terms of emergency notification, you can ask the name and address of people to be notified in case of an accident or emergency. You're not allowed to ask the name and address of relatives to be notified in case of accident or emergency. That's important. It's an important distinction. Experience, you can ask about their work experience, including names and addresses of previous employers, the dates of employment, reasons for leaving, and salary history, other countries visited. In terms of family and relatives, you can ask the names of if there's somebody or a relative already working at the company, you can ask about that, the name of them. You can ask names and addresses of parents or guardian of minor applicants to bring them in. After hiring, you can ask the name relationship of the address of the person to be notified in case of an emergency. That's after hiring them. You can't ask the name of a spouse, whether or not the spouse is employed, how much the spouse earns, whether or not the spouse is subject to transfer, questions about any relative of a candidate. You can't ask that stuff. And names of the relatives not working for the institutions. You can't ask the name or address of any relative or adult applicant other than those employed by your company. Gender and sex, the inquiry as to sex or restriction of employment to one sex is permissible only where bona fide occupational qualifications exist. Burden of proof is on the employer to prove that the BFOQ does not exist and that all members of the affected class are incapable of performing the job. You can inform that the institution is an equal opportunity employer, and after hiring, you can ask about gender for affirmative action plan statistics. It's illegal to ask the sex or request the sex of an applicant, anything which would indicate gender unless it's job related. So only such jobs in education would be a full-time locker room or a restaurant attendant for, for education, if it was in education or something like that. Sex is not a bona fide occupational qualification because a job involves physical labor beyond the capacity of some women. Nor can employment be restricted just because the job is traditionally labeled men's work or women's work. Sex cannot be used as a factor for determining whether an applicant will be satisfied on a particular job. Avoid questions concerning an applicant's height or weight unless you can prove they are necessary requirements for the job to be performed. The physical condition or their health, you can ask, do you have any physical, mental, or sensory handicaps which might affect work performance or which should be considered in job placement. You may not ask, do you have any handicaps, or questions that divulge handicaps which don't relate to the job. Any questions regarding having received workers' compensation, you can't ask that. Before hiring, you can ask whether an applicant can meet specified work schedules or has activities, commitments, or responsibilities that may hinder the meeting of work attendance requirements. They have to be asked of both people, both sexes, if you're asking that. Inquiries made to both males and females as to the duration of a stay on the job or anticipated absences. So you can't only ask to women, are you going to have a kid, and are you planning on taking maternity leave? That's illegal. You can talk to both people about any extended leaves that they would want to make or talk about that. After hiring, you can ask married or single status for insurance or tax purposes, the number of ages of dependencies, but all that has to be for the legal purposes only. You cannot ask about marital status before hiring, about the number and age of kids, child care arrangements, the information on child care arrangement, about pregnancy, or if they plan on having more kids. You can't ask any question that directly or indirectly results in limitation of job opportunity in any way. Military service, you can ask if they served, what branch of service or rank they attained, any education or job-related experience as it relates to that particular job, and you can require a military discharge certificate after hiring. You cannot ask for the military records if they had military service in any other country other than the U.S., or the type of discharge. You're not allowed to ask that. For access purposes, inquiry into whether or not the applicant's work records are under another name, you can ask, have you worked for this organization under a different name? Or have you ever, have you worked under a different name? So maybe it was a maiden name when you're checking references or something like that. It's illegal to ask about the name that would indicate the applicant's lineage, ancestry, national origin, or descent. If a woman is Miss, you're not allowed to ask if it's Miss, Mrs., or Ms. That indicates marital status. You're not allowed to ask if an applicant to give a maiden name or any previous name he's used. So you can ask, was there another name, or have you ever worked under another name? But you can't ask, was that a maiden name? You can't ask about names. Sometimes it's just in the wording. It's in the semantics on how you do this stuff. You can ask about names that have been changed by court order. You cannot ask about names that have been changed by court order, marriage, or otherwise. You can ask about organizational membership, like professional or social, etc., so long as the affiliation is not used to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, sex, national origin, or ancestry. Offices held, if any. You cannot ask a request listing of all the clubs the applicant belongs to or has belonged to, or the names of the organizations that they belong to that would indicate race, religion, color, ancestry, stuff like that. Ask them if they're members of, ARP or whatever, AARP. Pictures can be required for identification purposes only. You can ask for photographs before hiring. You cannot ask to take pictures of applicants during interviews. You cannot ask that or request that. Physical data, only you can require an applicant to prove the ability to do manual labor, lifting, and other physical requirements. You can request a physical examination. It is illegal to ask height, weight, impairment, or other non-specific job-related physical data. As far as race, you can indicate that the institution is an equal opportunity employer. That's about it. That's about all you can do in terms of race. You can ask race for affirmative action and statistics. It's illegal to ask or request any inquiry that would indicate race and or color, the color of the applicant's skin, eyes, or hair, any questions directly or indirectly relating to race or color. You can ask, to whom were you referred for a position here? Names of the people willing to provide professional and or character references for the applicant, and in general work references not relating to race, color, religion, sex, national origin, or ancestry. You cannot ask to request references specifically from clergy or any other persons who might reflect race, color, religion, sex, national origin, or ancestry. You can advise an applicant about the normal hours and days of work required by the job to avoid possible conflict with religions or other personal convictions. If they're required to work on Sundays, then you can let them know that. You cannot ask if their religions or denomination or affiliation, church, parish, pastor, or religious holidays are observed. You cannot tell people that any particular religious groups are required to work on their religious holidays. You can't ask about an applicant's religion or religious customs or holidays. And you can't ask for recommendations from a church official. It is legal to ask a willingness to work, required work schedule, choice of days, work days, shifts, etc. Ask if the applicant has military reservist obligations. You cannot ask if they have a willingness to work any particular religious holiday. So just in general, questions that you can ask, to sum it all up, you can ask the duties and responsibilities of the job. You can ask questions that are relevant to the job itself, the organization's missions, programs, and achievements. You can talk about that. You can talk about career possibilities and opportunities for growth, development, and advancement. You can talk about where the job is located, travel, mobility, equipment, and facilities available. You can talk about the individual's qualifications, abilities, experience, education, and interest. You can talk about what the person has done in a previous job that makes them able to perform the job for which they have applied. You can talk about the job-related educational experience the applicant has that makes the individual able to do the job, what problems the applicant had on previous jobs, what he or she disliked, the topic, if a topic, disability, religion, race, etc., is brought up by the candidate, you can discuss it, but it's not to be used as a reason for non-hire. So if they bring it up, you can talk about it, but it cannot be used to make a determination on whether or not to hire. You may not ask questions about race, color, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, disability, age, or ancestry. You may not ask in a series of interviews for a given position questions directed at one sex and not of the other. You may not ask if a candidate has filed or threatened to file discrimination charges. You may not ask questions about one's credit rating or request financial data. You may not ask for origin or the original name of an applicant whose name has been changed in court order or otherwise. You may not ask for an applicant's full. You may ask for an applicant's full name. You may ask, have you ever worked under a different name? Is any additional information relative to a different name necessary to check your work record? If the applicant is not allowed to ask how long he or she intends to work. Not ask general questions about high school or college degree unless you can provide the educational degree inquired about is necessary to perform the job. Be professional and consistent in addressing men and women. If using first names, do so for all candidates. Avoid flirting, patronizing, or making sexual ethnic jokes during the interview. In making a selection or recommendation, avoid making assumptions such as the following. Supervisors or managers might prefer men or employees of certain ethnic racial origins. Clients or customers might not want to deal with women or minorities. Women's work might lack credibility. The job might involve unusual working conditions that would disqualify the applicant. Do not place undue emphasis on conditions of employment, such as travel, heavy lifting, long hours, etc., in hope of discouraging the candidate and getting him or her to withdraw from the competition. If asked, give accurate information about the number of women or minority employees already in the organization. If a candidate asks, and if you don't have women or minorities in your own department, then you may arrange for the person to meet other women or minority staff members. You can arrange for that to happen. Don't assume that the person will necessarily want to meet other women or minority employees. If you're going to discuss the town or city, mention anything, do not try to overemphasize the town's aspects, such as the town is a good place for families or bring up children. In general, avoid references to a candidate's personal happiness. Don't assume that your town or city is not the place for a single person or for minorities. Obviously, don't indicate that you're interested in hiring a woman or a minority person as a statistic to improve your department's affirmative action equal employment opportunity profile. That's unlawful and an insult to apply different standards based on an applicant's sex or minority status. Treat the applicant like an insult and don't be patronizing. That's one of the most important I can say. I've seen people that I've been on interviews, job interviews, where the person hiring has this power trip and they sit back there and they have to, I'm giving you the job, I'm doing this, blah, 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 blah. Don't do that. Start the position off with respect. If you want them to be respectful, then you be respectful back. Okay, that's it. A lot of information there. I will post that listing that we have, that we just went through up on the webpage when I upload this as well. Next month, we're going to be in Nashville at the National WQA Convention, and we will be doing interviews. I say live from WQA. I'm not sure logistically whether we're going to pre-record it and then post it as a webinar. I will keep everybody updated. Watch for the constant contact list. But we will have a special MD exclusive for members only next. My intent is to have some interviews that are going to be really relevant from leaders within the industry that you're not going to want to miss. So, so we will have that for March. Thank you, everybody, very much. I appreciate the members, and I appreciate the opportunity to serve you. If you have any questions or need anything from us, please let us know. And again, if we can help you hire for your team, we'd love to talk to you about that. Thanks, everybody. Have an awesome day.